we are living in a period of culture where we've exchanged the practice of intimacy for the practice of intensity. And this is rooted in a number of cultural things, okay? I mean, it's as simple as the song form of our day, the verse, chorus, bridge song form, because that song form evolved in order to convey intensity, right? So you have a setup verse, a big chorus that you can repeat, and then maybe verse 2, you expand the theme a bit, another big chorus, and then you get to the bridge and you go even bigger, because there's this feeling like our volume, our intensity, our energy is somehow going to make God do what we want God to do.
You're listening to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is songwriter and worship leader Brian Doerksen.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
All right, welcome everybody. My name is Adam. This is the Ferment podcast, and today my very special guest is Brian Doerksen. Say hello, Brian.
Well, hello, everybody.
Man, super happy that you're joining us on the podcast.
Well, I love what you guys are doing, and it's a privilege to be on it.
Well, this is going to be really fun. That's all I know. Brian, I guess I just want to do what we always do. I would love for you to share some of your story, because I think people know you as a worship leader, and they definitely know you as a songwriter, and they've probably been in moments where you were leading worship, but maybe they don't know so much of your family story or your personal history. So could you just tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
Well, one of the cool things is I'm speaking to you from the home where I grew up. So I was 4 years old when my parents bought this Japanese man had built this little farmhouse about 45 minutes east of Vancouver, British Columbia. And I was 4 years old. We moved into this house, and I'm still living in it.
Amazing.
So that's there's definitely history and roots here for me, which is a really good thing. I grew up in a Mennonite family, conservative, not old order Mennonite. We didn't drive horse and buggy, but we were conservative. Maybe say conservative evangelical. My dad led the singing every Sunday in our little Mennonite church. And I said many times as a teenager, I'm not going to be anything like my dad.
Famous last words, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. And then my kind of, here's an interesting story. My connection into the vineyard. I was actually, my wife and I got married. We were 19. We were serving with YWAM in the Far East, in Singapore and Indonesia. And I wrote a letter. Anybody remember those things, where you actually write in pen and paper and put it in the mail? I sent my parents a letter from Singapore saying, describing my journey and what I was learning spiritually and culturally, and shared some of my frustrations with expressions of Christianity that I was encountering. And she wrote back and said, Brian, I think I've connected with somebody and some people that I think are really going to resonate with you. I just went to a John Wimber meeting, and there's this new group just emerging called the Vineyard. And some of what you're describing, a longing for honesty and intimacy and worship, a longing for like realness and not like pompous kind of like hype. It's just, anyway, so came back from Singapore, and my parents brought my wife and me to the first vineyard, walked in the back door. It was the first vineyard in Canada. Okay, I'll say that. The Langley Vineyard. It was pastored by Gary Best and Andy Park. And walked in the back, and the Spirit whispered to me, this is your new spiritual family. I didn't know a single person. And I mean, that whisper happened just partly based, I think, on my mom's recommendation, but I had no experience to back up. And then the experience came confirming the whisper.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I guess, Brian, just having you share that story, a couple things are really interesting to me about that. One would be, you said you grew up in a Mennonite home. I mean, clearly that's your parents' lineage and heritage, their spiritual journey that you grew up in. And so it forms a certain part of who you are.
Yeah.
But one of the things I love about your story is that not only did your parents shape maybe the first leg of your journey, but then your mother writes you this letter that shapes maybe the second leg of your journey.
Yeah.
Which that doesn't always happen, does it?
No. And then, I mean, the thing is, you see, I'm raised in a German home. My parents' first language is German, very solid, stable, but not very emotionally expressive, right? So now here's the next part of the story, how I connected personally with John Wimber and why we're actually having this conversation is, I became the bass player on the worship team. Okay. I was one of Andy's bass players. And I loved, in high school, I played bass in like the jazz band, and I loved the role of bass. I'm a bit of a shy introvert. I love playing the support role. And so I did that happily for a couple of years. And then one night we had our home kind of like home group, Vineyard home group. And at the end of the gathering, Andy looked over at me and goes, Brian, I think you've got a song that's bubbling in you that you should share right now that would be appropriate for tonight. And I'm like Beaker, no, kind of like when Dr. Bunsen Honeydew wants to put another electric nose warmer or something on him. I'm like, no, it's okay, and he just insisted. So I pick up Andy's guitar and I sing this simple song that I wrote after the birth of our daughter. Father, I want you to hold me. I want to rest in your arms today. Father, I want you to show me. Anyway, and it just touched people in the room. It was one of the first songs I had ever written. And it was my secret song. It was kind of like a song I sang to God, a song I sang holding my baby daughter in my arms, and a song I sang longing for intimacy and real human personal connection with God. So anyway, I did the song that night, and I thought, oh, okay, that's cool. It touched people. Well, a few months later, we go to the John Wimber conference in Edmonton, Alberta. There's about 5,000 people there, and I'm the bass player. And they do a session on the Father Heart of God and the Father Wound in culture. And John Wimber ends the session, and he looks over at Andy, and he says, Andy, would you come on up here and sing over the people while we start praying for them? And Andy turns to me. He points there and he goes, go, sing that song you sang for the 10 of us, your secret song over these 5,000 people. And this was back in the day when, Wimber and all the big shots, they were on the platform sitting there, and I had to walk right past them. Okay. I'm like 23 years old. I'm shaking in my boots. I'm going to grab Andy's guitar. They're looking at Andy off the side of the stage, shaking their head, going, why is this kid bass player walking up? This doesn't look good, you know?
I love
and
this.
Andy's just standing there side stage with his thumbs up going, this is going to be good. You guys are going to like this. Don't worry. It's okay, you know?
Amazing.
So I grab Andy's guitar and I start singing, you know, Father, I want you to hold. And people just start weeping all over the place. Anyway, and then John, the session ends and I'm just wrung out emotionally, right? And John Wimber walks up to me and go, okay, this could be interesting. And he goes, Brian, he says, that song, it was amazing. My father was an alcoholic. He left when I was 4 years old. I've needed a song that said that. Thank you so much for writing. Could we publish it? And I look at him like, what's publish? What do you mean? I have no. And then he says, do you have any other songs? And I say, I have one other song. It's called Faithful One. He says, yeah, well, he hadn't even heard it. He says, well, we'll publish that too.
Amazing.
And that's, I mean, in essence, that chain of events from that one thing is probably why we're sitting here having this conversation.
That's amazing. So Brian, do I understand the story right? When you get up and sing in front of 5,000 people, Andy Park's over off stage giving you the thumbs up and telling John Wimber it'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that really the first time you led worship in a public way? Or is this just the first time you led with the vineyard?
Worship. I would have led worship in small groups, in home settings.
Yeah.
And I was playing bass on our church worship team, and there was, several hundred people showing up for our worship services. But I hadn't led in any kind of context that large. I had never sang for a group that big before.
Yeah, so you were still very green.
Yes, I was.
Oh my gosh. I can imagine the adrenaline in your could you even make the shapes, the chord shapes on the guitar? My hands would be shaking, right? Yeah.
My hands were shaking a bit too. And the thing is, of course, as you know, everybody's guitar is a bit different. You know, it's different strings, different width of anyway. It was like the wrong strap position, and I'm trying to do this with Andy's guitar.
Yes. Yeah, if you're a worship leader, you know exactly what Brian's talking about right there. You know, it's the nuances of your instrument versus someone else's, and then you put on a big spot, and then everything's just kind of wrong. So good. Well, I love that. What a great story. Well,
so that's how I met Wimber, and that's how we're sitting here having this conversation.
So talk to me about after that. Then what happened? Did you go home and think to yourself, well, maybe I should start leading worship? Or did Andy say, Brian, you probably should do that regularly? Or what was the next thing? Yeah,
I mean, I think, again, there's nothing in life that's really like turning an on and off switch. Usually it's a dial, right? So usually things happen incrementally. So, I mean, I had been playing bass on Andy's team. Then Andy started having me co-lead with him by playing guitar alongside him and leading a song or two. And then he would be conveniently away for a Sunday and say, Brian, why don't you try leading next Sunday? And then, but it didn't take him long, like literally months. And then he announces, oh, I'm leaving to go plant a church. I think you should be the new worship pastor of the Langley Vineyard. And I had felt this calling to do it. So I agreed to do it, even though I felt overwhelmed and over my head. And we had a few songs that we had written, I had written, Andy had written, that we were using. So we decided, why don't we do an evening of worship and record it? That was October the 1st, 1989. And the project became called Changed by Your Glory. And we thought we were making a cassette tape, dates for our few hundred people in our church, but a few of those cassette tapes also found their way south to the Anaheim Vineyard where Wimber was, and then they just started finding their way around the world. And we, instead of selling a few hundred copies, we sold 70,000, with no record label, no advertising, nothing. And then that led to me being invited down to LA to do a recording with Vineyard Music USA. The Touching the Father's Heart series had just kicked off. So the first one I did was with Kevin Prosh on one side and me on the other side, which is also incredibly intimidating in a way, because I'm the shy, quiet kid from Canada, and here's Kevin Prosh, who's just this utterly mystical, flamboyant, charismatic, crazy musician guy.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah. So talk to me about, what is the experience like of, you're making a little recording at your church. You think it's just for the few hundred of you, and then this thing just starts to become something that maybe you never imagined. There's no record label. There's no social media. No one knows about this. You're not putting this on the internet. It's just word of mouth. Tell me about what that experience is like.
Oh, it's this wrapped up of very encouraging and very frightening, and it's out of your control, right? I mean, I think there's a lot nowadays where we think that we can work it out, right? Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to employ this strategy, and we're going to do this, and we're going to grow it like this. And there are things in the business world that work like that. But I think, this was a time when you just did what you did, and whatever the only factor that would really change the impact was word of mouth. And obviously, I was also, I put it this way: in that time, there was the modern worship thing was just starting to mushroom. It was just starting to grow. And you had Hosanna Integrity's thing starting to happen. Maranatha's thing was starting to happen, or had been happening for a little while. Probably Vineyard, was starting to happen. And I was touched by bits in all of it, but there wasn't a lot of intimacy in it. There wasn't a lot of what I would call things that really expressed both my personality and my values. And so then I thought, well, it's one thing to kind of critique and stand back from a distance. It's another thing to try and create an alternative. It's a lot harder than it seems.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about this very dynamic, about how easy it is to critique and how hard it is to build.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that critique isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we do need to critique. Sometimes we do need to point things out. But man, when it comes to being the person who's going to put the skin in the game and go, now I have to build something, that's a much different deal.
Yeah. And they're so, like, building anything physical or creative or, a song or an album or an experience or a worship service. Like, there's so many layers to it, right? And our life is shaped by all of the layers of all of the choices and the cultural context in which we grew up in, and the cultural context where we spend our young adult years, where all of a sudden we become open to outside of our family influences. And all of a sudden we go, oh, I never considered that. Or, oh, I could shape, this is going to shape who I am. And so, but it's at the same time, I think I still do today what I started doing in that season, which was I try to write songs and lead worship in a way that was focused on heart, on intimacy, on vulnerability. And, the fads come and go, but I think that through line remains for me.
Well, I'd love to just maybe pause here for a second and pick up this conversation right here. You've used the word intimacy probably 4 times so far in our little conversation. And I know that's a word that people would connect to your songs, and they would connect to even your style of leading worship. And you've even said how much that means to you. Can you talk to us about that? What
Hmm.
does it mean to be a worship leader who's allowing our gathered worship experience to be a moment of intimacy with God and then with each other? Or what does it mean for a song to convey closeness and intimacy and vulnerability?
Hmm. Well, I mean, first of all, let me say that I believe that all good art is intimate, okay? Because it's self-revealing, right? And so when we talk about worship, and particularly worship and song, it's the revealing of who we really are to who God really is, and it's as simple as saying that. The beautiful thing about that is that when we take that risk and when we do that, God responds. Now, the thing is, culturally, we are living in a period of culture where we've exchanged the practice of intimacy for the practice of intensity.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So what I mean by that, and this is rooted in a number of cultural things. Okay. I mean, it's as simple as the cultural thing of the song form of our day, the verse, chorus, bridge song form, because that song form evolved in order to convey intensity, right? So you have a setup verse, a big chorus that you can repeat, and then maybe verse 2, you expand the theme a bit, another big chorus, and then you get to the bridge and you go even bigger, because there's this feeling like, our volume, our intensity, our energy is somehow going to make God do what we want God to do.
Yeah.
And that has a theological root, and it has a cultural root. And I think the beauty of, I think, the vineyard values that I discovered in the mid to late 80s was, and by that point, the vineyard thing had been going on for already about 10 years. And it wasn't just in the vineyard, but there was something about Carol Wimber, John, Carl Tuttle, some of the early vineyard people, that they had this stirring in their heart for intimacy with God. And the way they responded to that stirring was to come together. It started in homes, and they would just sing not about God, but to God, to Jesus, their love, their surrender, their trust. They would lay their hearts bare, right? And and there was always this thing of playing down hype, like we don't need to force God's hand. We don't need to bring him down, because God's already down. God's already here. God's already walking among us. And so then they chose songs and music that facilitated that language. And so I remember the very first Vineyard conference I went into. This is before my story. Before I had attended a Vineyard conference, before I was bass player at a Vineyard conference, and I remember it was in Kansas City. I had driven 40 hours to Kansas City to attend a conference. I mean, this is such an expression, I think, of the hunger that was in my heart. I heard what was happening, and I sensed this would resonate with me. So drove 40 hours, day and night, just swapping drivers, did not stop. Got there to get there an hour before the conference started, waited for it to start. And Danny Daniels walked onto the stage wearing, tattered blue jeans and a t-shirt. I mean, that was sign number one. This was different because I had been to Christian conferences already by this point. I was 19 and, people got dressed up. It was like, and all of a sudden, oh, interesting. Patty Kennedy walked behind him, walked up to the mic beside Danny, and she started singing, "You are here, and I behold your beauty, your glory fills this place." And then she sings, "Calm my heart to hear you, cause my eyes to see you. Your presence here is the longing to the answer." Your presence here is the answer to the longing in my heart. I mean, all these years later, I can remember like every word. I can remember how I felt. My heart just started almost like beating in time with what was happening. Like I just felt such a resonance. And, there was no hype. There was just hearts opening up to God and God responding with his presence. And this whole thing about the presence of God, when we talk about, we practice intensity more than we practice intimacy. Songs are about, the atmosphere and God come and change the atmosphere. But see, the presence of God isn't an atmosphere, it's a person, right? It's a relationship, and you don't need fireworks. What you need is heart connection. What you need to know is that you are being heard, that you are hearing God. And it's interesting, the Judeo-Christian phrase for the voice of God, the still small voice, right? It's not the crazy loud shout, it's the still small voice. I think that's what we hunger for. And that's what I experienced. And that's what I still hunger for experiencing.
Hello, Ferment friends. Mike O'Brien with the Vineyard School of Worship. This October, Thrive, our all-ages worship leader training, is going online. We have instructors from all over the world bringing new and fresh content for worship leaders that are serving the local church. Our training is soaked in kingdom values and practice. This year's theme is focused on being a non-anxious presence, both on and off the stage. We encourage you to grow and change this year. We've split up the training in 2-hour increments over 6 sessions in October. So you can attend live and participate in the discussions, or you can simply audit the course and go through the material at your own pace. We also have some extra perks that if you want to grow in songwriting or spiritual direction or other areas, you'll be able to sign up for that. Go to vsow.org to register. Use the code FERMENT15 for 15% off. Invite yourself, invite a friend, invite somebody you're making an investment in. We'll see you at Thrive in October.
Brian, part of what I hear in your story there, as you're telling stories that sort of bring back to the surface our vineyard value of intimacy, as opposed to just maybe the modern worship context of intensity, I just can't help but recognize all the ways in which some of our fascination with intensity, or the way you were saying a moment ago, even the way that we write and construct songs. So verse, big chorus, second verse, bigger chorus, huge bridge. So every
Even
song
bigger,
goes
yeah.
to like octave jump. Like let's
Yeah,
octave jump.
yeah.
Now let's jump to the next
Yeah.
octave. It's just what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't help but reflect on the fact that sometimes it feels like maybe with intensity we're trying to coerce God. Trying to,
Yeah.
if we do this, then he has to do that. Or
Yeah.
there's even certain parts of charismatic theology that will just come out and say, worship changes the atmosphere. Worship brings the kingdom, or what, it's all this stuff that sort of like puts us in the initiation box rather than in the response position of responding to a God who's already here.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing you tell a story that's in some ways the opposite. It's that God is here, and how can we just tell the truth about who he is and who we are?
Yeah.
Without any
exactly.
pretending.
Yeah. And that was a cultural shift, or a breaking with predominant cultural moment, in the 80s. And it feels like, again, we need to be willing to break with some of the current culture in order to keep on returning, but with fresh expressions of that value of intimacy over intensity.
Okay, so let me just ask you another question about intimacy here. Because the vineyard has changed, especially in the last 10 years. And I know that it's always changing, right? But the vineyard's changed, especially in the last 10 years. The vineyard has become way more diverse. There's way more people of color among us. And I think this is a real work of the Spirit, I mean, I just can't go to any vineyard conference now without meeting people from so many different backgrounds, urban and rural and Black and white and Asian and Latino. I mean, it's just so in the water. Talk to me about our vineyard value of intimacy, but with multifaceted cultural values where, I'm just thinking of Hispanic cultures. They're so warm. They're so exuberant. And sometimes when I talk to people from these backgrounds, the beginning of this conversation feels like, I need to change my Hispanic culture. Talk to me how we can keep intimacy and let Hispanic culture flourish. How can we keep intimacy and let like Black gospel flourish?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, but the thing is that when, like, each of us have a musical mother tongue, right? Like a way that just is a natural extension of ourselves. And so my experience, like joining the vineyard back then in the mid 80s, was I was encountering people who were being genuinely themselves, but using their musical mother tongue to reveal their heart to God and to let God reveal his heart to them. So why would we expect other people to change their mother tongue to try and get into intimacy? Well, then it's not going to be intimacy, right? It's going to be some kind of forced performance. And so, I mean, in our context in Canada, we have some of those racial minorities, but for us, a lot of it has to do with the Indigenous population. And one of the things I love about hearing Indigenous people worship, when they are free to do so in their mother tongue, in their cultural way, musical way, it sounds different, it looks different, but you can feel it. You still have the same resonance, right? Because they have a freedom that is not they're not being like cloaked with this other cultural thing over top of them. And so sometimes that's exciting. Like when I say practicing in like intimacy instead of intensity, I'm not saying that it's never exciting or even loud. I'm saying it's honest. I'm saying it's real. I'm saying it's vulnerable, and it has the full range of emotion, from joy to sadness, from anger to just a common celebration, and we all know, we're learning more and more from good science that you can't selectively numb emotion, right? So some people want the joy, but they don't want the sadness. Well, that doesn't work, right? You have to be willing to let the sadness be if you want the joy, right?
Yeah.
So in intimacy and worship, we have to let the various colors and musical expressions happen.
I love that. That's maybe the best word we're going to hear this week. You can't selectively numb the emotions.
No, you
Man, what a
can't.
word for the worship culture right now.
Yeah, and it's when the pandemic hit, it it doesn't work, in my opinion, just to keep running the same play over and over again. Like, we have to start taking on and taking in how we're suffering and what we're going through, and then that has to be expressed outward. We want the joy, we want it to be over, but we have to go through it together, and we have to feel the feelings that this brings up in all of us, the uncertainty, and that needs to be expressed in our songs.
That's a great word. Well, Brian, here's what I want to do now, if it's okay. I want to shift gears and maybe dial into being a worship leader for a few minutes.
Sure.
Because when I just think about you and I think about the gifts that you've sown into our movement, the thing that comes to the top of my mind is, wow, you're one of the best worship leaders. You're just one of the best worship leaders. I mean, I think you're a great songwriter. I think you're a great pastor. I've seen the work that you've done around the world, and there's just so many gifts that you have, but you're just such a good worship leader, and you've been in this for more than a minute. I would just love it if you would talk to us for a little while about what does it mean to be a good worship leader? Like, what is a good worship leader?
Well, I mean, wow, that's a lifetime, that's a lifelong journey. And I would, maybe the first thing I would say is, being a good worship leader is about, first of all, being a good person. by being attentive to your own soul, to the condition in your own heart, and being attentive to those around you, and being attentive to God's whispers. And because, when I hear that phrase, okay, well, what does it mean to be a good worship leader? The inference is that when you're doing that well, you're doing something and people are following, right? And people are being drawn, and they're following with you, and they're walking with you because they feel like they can trust you. It's like somehow there's something about that phrase that evokes to me the phrase "a good shepherd," But in order for that to happen, like for that goodness and for people to follow, they need to resonate with, they need to trust. And I think, again, I mean, if I just say one more thing about this intimacy versus intensity thing is, because what gives people that desire to follow somebody is that they resonate, and they respect, and they trust, right? And when we give ourselves over to intensity over intimacy, we're trying to manufacture that resonance, versus letting our lives be the resonance that draws people with us, right? So we're a good worship leader leads out of who they are, out of how they love, loving God, loving people, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that, of course, means all parts, your body, your emotions, your intellect, your artistic, your creativity, and you're loving your neighbor as yourself. You're being aware that what we do has an impact on other people around us. So you're dialing in all those things at the same time. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And you know, I think for a while we kind of thought, you know, worship leaders, good worship leaders, are worship leaders that know how to put together a slick set. You know, they know how to put together the perfect set of songs, the right tempo flow, how to medley songs, how to get really quickly through song transitions, how to make a clever key change. And again, I think the musical skills are, I mean, the more we do it, the more people can relax under our leadership, because that they feel like we know what we're doing, even though sometimes we're just kind of faking it, not faking it, but there's that sense of, but we thought that was the main thing. But actually, more and more what I've realized is, and I've been doing this now for 30 plus years, is that the music is a part of it, but it's the personal. Do people feel at ease? Do they feel like they can lean in? Do they feel like they can relax and just let you lead them? Or are they feeling apprehensive, like, well, this person's got an axe to grind and they're trying to convince me, you know, they're trying to talk me either into worshiping, or I've never found that, you know, trying to pep talk a congregation into worshiping makes for good worship leaders. I you know, if you're there, whether it's online or whether it's in person, you're there because you want to be there. You've chosen to be there. And you know the context and the point of the gathering is we're here to meet with God and with each other. So I don't think they need to be talked into it. I think they just need to be led.
I just love that you're rooting us back into being a particular kind of person.
Yeah. It's and that's what the sustainable thing is, right? Like the techniques, the styles, the cultural things, those are going to ebb and flow. But if you are really just, you are this person, you are not acting, you know, like you see, the thing is, a lot of the music we consume as entertainment and as whatever is performed by actors, right? They put on a role, they put on a persona. My favorite musicians, some of the old school ones like James Taylor and Van Morrison and stuff, I mean, they will literally they'll say, yeah, like some musicians, like, you know, I don't know how they do it, but they put on this role, and like Lady Gaga, like, you know, people like that, they just, it's like performance art, right? In order to convince you or to move you. And people like James Taylor, just like, well, what you get is what you see. This is who I am. These are the songs that move me. These are the stories I want to tell. And away they pull out their guitar and they start singing, you know, and you know, and there's very distinct differences between being a performing singer songwriter and a worship leader. And I actually do both. And I'm very aware of what I'm doing when I'm asked to lead worship and when I'm asked to do a Brian Doerksen concert, right? Like, and even at the Brian Doerksen concert, there's going to be worshipful songs and moments and heart, but I'm also, I've got more flexibility to tell stories, to, you know.
Yeah, it's a different setting.
All of that to say is I think a good worship leader is not an actor. Though a good worship leader uses scripts. Right? So that it gets, you know what I mean by that? Like, in other words, there are certain things that you can say, certain liturgical elements or things that you do that you don't have to create yourself, because you're stepping into this long history of all going in the same direction, right? And you are in that flow and you are taking on board.
Love it. Let me
I
ask
don't
you.
know if I'm answering your question.
No, I
because
love it, because
that's
what you're
sparking
getting.
a bunch of things. A good worship leader.
Yeah, no. But what I hear you saying mostly is that a good worship leader is a particular kind of person.
Yes.
And it's possible to just focus on how to be a better musician or how to put together a better set
Yeah.
list. And I believe in all those things. Like, gosh, let's play better. Let's sing as good as we can. There are some ways to put together set lists that matter and some thinking that can go into that. But the thing that's underneath it is what kind of person am I? Because I'm always bringing that, right?
Well, when you say, oh, well, a particular kind of person, I'm not saying only this type of I'm saying all personality types can play.
Yes.
And all personality types can be worship leaders. And then you have to be a worship leader that also stays somewhat true to your personality type, but is also, you're not just leading your personality type, right? That the church is made up of all personality types, extroverts, introverts, high, low, like all. And so, and we also then recognize that each of us are going to connect more with certain leaders. But I think there's a breadth and a depth to what we do, and we can lead more broadly when people sense that we are truly that our lives are resonating this versus, oh, that's a clever set we put together, and we're done now.
Yeah, I guess when I say a particular kind of person, what I mean by that is an actual good person, someone who's pursuing the good, someone who's pursuing God, someone who's open to the other people in the room.
Yeah.
And just the way you described it a moment ago, there's introverts, there's extroverts, there's people who are up here and there's people who are way down here in the valley right now, and just stepping into that moment as my authentic self, but with some awareness of who's here and how could I help gather them and actually care about them and tell a story that maybe matches some of these stories in the room.
Yeah. And to actually know some of the stories in the room, they're not just random people, there are, the more okay, so-and-so just lost their job, and so-and-so just lost their mother, and so-and-so is celebrating an anniversary, and you know what I mean? Like, and the more that, it becomes part of the good layering of everything that we do.
Let me ask you another question about leading worship. What's a worship leader's main job?
Oh, well, I mean, besides what we just talked about, the worship leader's main job is, first of all, to just be that person, to be open, to be a worshiper, to be on a journey, to keep being a lifelong learner. And then the second part of that is to do that in a way that gently brings other people along, that helps them, that helps level the path for them, that removes obstacles, that finds a way to sing and to pray and to lead in a way that it goes, oh, that's what I needed to sing today, or that's what I needed to hear today. And for that to happen, I think you have to be, in tune with both your people, and you have to be in tune with God's Spirit and listening. What do we need to hear? What do I need to adjust? Every situation, every gathering is unique.
That's right. Let me talk to you about this, or have you talked to us about this? I've just been thinking about how many times our vineyard worship stories are so similar to the one that you told at the beginning of our conversation. Like, you're playing bass for Andy. Andy's like, Brian, why don't you lead worship here? Sing your song to us at the home group, and now come and sing it. And so there's someone else that's involved in our story, right? Like, very few of us just came to church and someone pointed and said, you are our next person. There's some other person who's bringing us along or leading us. And I know that's true in my story, and I've seen it so many times around me. I would love it if you would talk to us about how we can balance having a worship culture that brings people up and gives people a chance, gives people new people a chance. But then also, we want to have good experiences. We want to have maybe a worship culture that does value excellence in some way. And sometimes there's a tension in there between having an experience that's good for as many people as possible, but then also realizing, gosh, we're here to call people up and to make room and to pass things along. Can you just talk to us about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've made it kind of like my life's goal. The metaphor I use is I always want to ride the bicycle, which is one pedal is doing and the other pedal is mentoring and helping others do. So as soon as I get a chance to do something, I immediately say, how can I help others do? And so I think every leader needs to in some way have that built in certain ways, that they say, this isn't just about me, this is about me helping others be released into their calling. And I've had a very specific, I feel like, calling towards women worship leaders, where I grew up in a context that didn't allow women to do anything. Right. So I made it and to know my story, you'd have to kind of know my mother and what happened in her journey spiritually to know why this is so important to me, and how she was shut down over and over again. And so I think, and the danger is, as soon as we have this value of excellence and putting everything together and making it quote unquote slick, and I think our value should always be, our value to mentor and release others should be higher than our value towards excellence and slickness. That we should always be this making room. Let's try this. Let's experiment. Our calling and our role isn't to protect what we have. It's to grow what we have. It's not to protect our turf as a leader. It's to actually welcome others onto the turf and say, come and play. Everybody gets to play. That's one of the vineyard slogans, right? So and I'm like, right now, I'm a part of a small vineyard expression called The Table. We're like 30 to 40 people, and but our team leader, Kate, we've said that for, again, this next year, our primary goal is mentoring other leaders. And we're small, but we're just starting, and that's the DNA from the word go. And I don't know, like even in our little community, like, I'll have somebody else lead worship and song one week, and then somebody will make a comment, whatever, and, well, Brian, when are you going to do it again? There's that changed. Okay, well, yeah, absolutely. But I want to have other voices and other perspectives. But we're not, I think we need to value that more than we value our excellence.
I love that. Brian, I want to ask 2 more questions before we wrap up here. I guess this one's another one that's from 30,000 feet, but you kind of grew up in the worship movement. In some ways, you've seen it almost, from when it really took off from those, the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It really gathered steam in the 90s. No one was really thinking of being a career worship leader back in the early 80s. That just wasn't a job that was out there to be had necessarily. So you've seen this thing. You've done the congregation thing. You've helped people write songs all around the world. You've made records, you've toured, you've done the thing. I would love for you to just share what you'd like to say to our Vineyard community. As someone who's done all the things, you've done all the things, you've touched all the bases. What would you like to say to our Vineyard worship community?
I mean, I just can't. For me, I can't get away from the 3 things that I believe are the core values of Vineyard worship: intimacy, accessibility, and integrity. And that's how we started. And I believe that's the future, that we should practice intimacy in a way that is real, is relational, that we don't need to give in just because intensity is popular right now. We don't need to give in to that. The whole thing of accessibility, which means we are being vulnerable to God and to each other. We're being open to new people, to new ideas, to new expressions. And the integrity piece is the resonance piece I talked maybe a little bit about before, that our lives resonate, that we don't have to manufacture resonance, that we just let our lives resonate who we are and who God is. And if we would creatively live out those 3 values, they're sustainable. We can do that for our whole life. They're not faddish. There's this expression, along obedience in the same direction. And apparently, Eugene Peterson, he's got a whole book on this, right? And I'm sure some of the listeners have read it, but he was actually quoting somebody else, a German philosopher who became an atheist named Friedrich Nietzsche, I think is how you say his name. But what I realize in that is that there's this, it's almost like a universal truth, that if we would give ourselves to a long obedience, to a lifelong devotion in the same direction, then good things will emerge from that. And the people who inspire us the most are people who have given themselves to something and someone over a long period of time. The cultural narrative right now is so much about dissatisfaction, about trying new things, about flitting from here or there with fads, with relationships. Our entertainers are people who know how to make us laugh and cry in the moment, but don't know how to live a a life where their soul is at rest. And I think we've got an incredible opportunity to make different choices and to do this for our whole life. So
I love that.
that's what's on my heart. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Also, I can't help but think that your Mennonite roots are showing.
Yeah,
you're talking about a long obedience in the same direction. That's some good thinking there.
I don't, even the word obedience, it could sound like drudgery, right?
No, I don't hear it that way though. I mean, and maybe it's the romantic in me.
Yeah.
Because you're right. We do live in a world where everything is changing, where fads are not just what's present, but it's the way things move.
Yeah.
And there's something really appealing about a life that's steady, a life that's decided, a life that's consecrated to one thing. And so I feel the romance, I feel the woo in that.
Yeah. And yet it's like still part of that is saying, I want to be a lifelong learner, right? And I don't have to be afraid of the truth. So if science reveals a new truth, I can humble myself and go, wow, I didn't know that. We didn't know that. Okay, well, we'll take it on more, because the best theologians, the best scientists, the best artists all have humility as their core thing, right? Because the scientist is like, let the data speak. I think those of us that are in, spiritual vocations, we have to let the still small voice speak and let our hearts and the people around us speak, and we make adjustments. So when I stay along obedience in the same direction, I'm not saying we don't change. Our faith goes through big change. For me, huge season of deconstruction. And, that often the term is reconstruction. I prefer a term I heard Fran Pratt use of faith renovation, right? Like, our faith is going to go through ongoing renovation. I mean, I have some things going on even just this last year with our special needs son, who's now 28 and who can't really speak and who is quite traumatized by the pandemic because all of his therapies were canceled and all of his activities, and he didn't understand why. And he's self-harm and he's doing stuff, and it's just agonizing as a father, and I can't fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's hard things too, right? Like, but I want to keep learning. I want to keep pressing into it.
Well, and Brian, I can't help but think of this as you share that. Shout out to Fran Pratt, Faith Renovation. I would imagine the house that you're sitting in has been renovated a time or two.
Yeah. In fact, we just finished what my wife calls our final renovation by creating a master bedroom. Finally, we've been married almost 36 years. We have 6 children. There was never time for us to create a space for ourselves because it was all about the kids and about all of this. And we finally converted the very top, used to be the attic, used to have one of our special needs son, and we were in a little room and he was in a little, and we just kind of moved him to the basement because some of the girls moved out, and we just created a master suite. And Joyce looks at me and goes, maybe that's the last renovation. The house was built in 1937. I go, well, we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah,
but I'm just reflecting on, you're talking about faith renovation. You're talking about how you've changed, which is a big part of this podcast. That's why we call it the Ferment. You're talking about how even this year you've been challenged and changed.
Yeah.
And I just can't help but think about the house you're living in, and it's those kinds of changes which keep the house alive. It's those kinds of changes which, I mean, the bones are there; they're not moving.
Yeah.
But it's those kinds of changes which keep the home alive. I think that's kind of a beautiful picture.
Yeah, and I'm living in the middle of that picture and trying to keep on learning, keep on renovating as I need to, but also being at peace, like just being content and being, have that miracle of a soul at rest,
Well, Brian, let's end right here. It's the question we give everybody at the end of the podcast on this season of the Ferment. I would love it if you would just share with us what you're dreaming about. What's the dream of your heart right now?
Wow. Well, oh boy, I'm in the middle of recording my first hymns album, and I am literally dreaming ancient songs and melodies and words, and they are filling my imagination, and I'm being mentored by songwriters from several hundred years ago, again, like just in their melodies. And then my dream for the future is I want to help launch some kind of online songwriting mentoring training program to help songwriters around the world. I'm dreaming about that, how to structure it, so I'm in the thick of letting songs from the past, like just like they're like I'm pickling in their juices, I'm just completely immersed in them. And then immediately I start thinking about, well, how can I help people write the songs that will be sung 200 years from now? Like, could we even dream of doing that? Yeah, I think we can, because the people who wrote the hymns were ordinary people who were processing life and their faith, and they wrote poetic words and melodies, and those songs are alive. They're just alive. They're not, the people who wrote them have passed on, but their songs are alive, and I want to help other people write songs that live on.
Beautiful. Be sure to tell us when you get there. When that launches, let us know.
Yeah, I will.
We'll amplify the signal.
Thanks.
All right, man, Brian, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, such a joy to be with you, and just love and respect what you guys are doing. And it, as we talk right now, the border is still officially closed and to non-essential traffic and people, and it's been hard, actually. It's just psychological. I live about 5 miles from the US border across into the Canadian side, and I love you guys. I love what's happening. I also, some of what I hear happening breaking my heart in the news. And I go, oh, so I pray for you guys in the US, and hope you guys pray for us in Canada. And
that's right.
And we'll be together in person again. I know it.
Yes. Come on, 21, please, Jesus, hear our prayer.
Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Peace.
Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Keller, Events Director for Vineyard Worship. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple of ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.